EA Sports just came out with their deep dive of Dynasty mode in College Football 25, and I already have an 11-page paper of everything that you probably missed in the deep dive video, and also what I read throughout the 75,000 words that they put online. But before we get into that, I'm giving away a copy of College Football 25, and the way you can enter is by liking this video, subscribing to the channel, and leaving a comment down below what team I should rebuild first in the new game. Let's actually get into everything you need to know about the game. The first thing that I feel is a big must for this game is the fact that they are allowing you to be an offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator. Now this is pretty big because honestly, I didn't think they would bring it in because Madden doesn't have it, but this was a big part of college football, and I hope they bring it to Madden in the future. I'm not saying that your coach, has to be an offensive coordinator or defensive coordinator. You can just start out as that and build your coach through the years. But you can start as a head coach for any team. Your coach gains XP for players getting drafted into the NFL, and also big game rivalries and completing in-game challenges. And you can also have 3 different types of coaches. So you can have a motivator, a recruiter, or tactician, which all have different vital key things they do well. Like motivator motivates you and boosts your team. Recruiter has an easier time getting big recruits to commit to your school, while tactician gives players boosts in game. Now I don't know what the difference between motivator and tactician are, since they're both giving your players boosts, if you know what I'm saying. Another thing is, coordinators have the same attributes head coaches have, so the transition to head coach is seamless. So let's say you start out as a defensive coordinator, and then you transition to become a head coach at, let's say, San Diego State. Your attributes and stuff are going to transition over to being a head coach, which is super nice because that's something that you had to completely restart on when in NCAA 14. Not saying you didn't get the points back, you just didn't have some of the same abilities that you did. In the game, you have all the same abilities, which is super vital. In addition to the position boosts that you can get for your head coach, there's also scheme guru archetype focuses and gameplay focuses. Now, some of them are battery pack, which means offensive players fatigue slower and hurry up. Caught napping, increased delay to defenders looking to the sideline for the snap. On their heels, team composure boost for first downs gained while running, hurry up. Tipped your hand, chance to see defenses coverage, shell, and hurry up. And these are just some of the few that you can choose from. There's a ton of them. If you want to go see them, you can check them out on the EA Sports website, but it's going to be too long for me to go through all of them and have a good video. Another thing is, coaches have goals that need to be met when they're hired. And this is kind of like it was in NCAA 14, but they go a little bit more in depth. They have 4 types of expectations you have to be met or you will be fired. You have to win a certain amount of games, win a conference championship, make the college football playoff, or win the national championship. Now, I don't know why you would get hired and have to win a national championship, but this is something they added into the game, which I think is kind of cool. Some things from NCAA 14 stayed, like your job security fluctuates throughout the season based on your wins and losses. With that, coaching carousel is another thing that is taken into account. Let's say you get fired. Well, guess what? If your coach is a high level overall, you may get hired somewhere else. That's not to say that you're going to get a better job. You may have to downgrade and work your way back up, but at least you can get another job, which I think is super cool. Whereas in the NCAA 14, you had to just recreate a character. That kind of sucked, but you had that ability. The things that schools are looking at is your coach's level, your coach's archetype, pipeline. So coaches have primary pipelines where they're really good at recruiting. Let's say your coach is from Georgia. You probably want to stick with Georgia schools so that you can recruit better players in Georgia. Now, coach prestige is also a thing where, let's say you're a Nick Saban type coach. Well, let's say Alabama fires you because they want to go with a younger head coach to revamp the team. Well, you're probably going to get hired somewhere else, even if your last seasons at Alabama weren't that good. Another thing is you can get multiple job offers. This is because in previous games in NCAA 14, you would get one job offer, you had to accept it then, or you want to get that opportunity again. So this is nice because you can get multiple job offers and weigh them like you would in real life. Coordinators can get hired and can get fired, but you do the firing. They cannot get fired by the AI unless you fire them as the head coach. Now, coordinators have 2-year contracts and will only leave for better jobs. Let's say they get a head coaching job at San Diego State, they will leave for that job. They will not leave for a job as an offensive coordinator at Georgia Southern. You also have to make offers to coordinators and coaches to get them in like free agency. So like if you go after a player in Madden, you give them an offer. If they accept the offer, they're now on your team. That's going to be how it kind of works for coaches. Now let's move on to recruiting and roster management. This is a really, really big part of the game that I feel like isn't being talked about enough, especially because in Dynasty, there's a lot of things we have to look at. There's so many additions and aspects to this game because the game of college football is always evolving. And one of those things is now players can transfer at any time. They have expectations as players that you gave them as when they were recruits or when they're in the transfer portal, that you said you're going to be playing, 100 snaps. If they're not getting that snap count, they will transfer out because you lied to them. I think that is something that is really, really cool and very, very realistic. And the way they got this realistic feel is they talked to coaches, players, scouts, and all of that to kind of see how they go about the recruiting process and see how players transfer out. I think that is a really, really cool aspect that they brought in that most video games probably don't even take into account. Ultimately, they landed on 4 core goals when building a program. They wanted to humanize recruits by giving them unique needs and motivations as players that you discover by recruiting them and figuring out what they need. There's different regions of the country by player caliber. So this basically is talking about how there's historic data where some schools just produce higher blue chip talent than other schools. Like Josh Allen in Wyoming, yes, he became a really good player, but Wyoming isn't really known for, putting out high talent players, whereas a place like Florida maybe. Now we'll talk about that a little bit more later on in the video, but that's just a little bit brief of a description of that. The different resources available to schools ensuring the top schools can blanket the country, while smaller schools will need to target certain areas with their approach. This is realistic because Alabama can recruit players from all over, whereas let's say Wyoming can only really recruit players from around Wyoming and around surrounding areas because they don't have the same amount of staff, the same amount of coaches, those kind of things. To make the transfer portal feel more authentic and unpredictable, recruiting will basically be the same in NCAA 14 in some ways. Recruits can lock you out if you're not meeting their requirements. Let's say they are a player that likes to focus on their brand, and they are a player that likes to focus on, winning. If your team isn't winning, they don't want to play for you. If you don't care about their brand, they don't want to play for you. They care about academics, but you're a party school, they don't care. So they will go to a school that focuses on that. There's 14 different things they take into account. Playing time. If if they don't get a lot of playing time, they may lock you out. Playing style. If they're a scrambling quarterback and you're more a pocket passer, that recruit probably isn't going to come to your school. That's something that I talked about in an earlier video, and I think that's really cool that they're adding it to the game. I was kind of hinted at it on Twitter, but I didn't know if it was accurate or not, and now we have a confirmed accuracy on that. Is your school a championship contender? Or what are their program traditions? Or what's the campus like? Those are all things that go into the recruiting process and having a recruit commit to your school. Another thing is, how often do you have a player from your school go pro? Or what is your brand exposure? Are you able to help this player become famous? Or are you just another place where they're gonna be at until they get to the NFL? If they get to the NFL. Another thing is academic prestige, conference prestige, coaches prestige. All those things, go into the aspect of the school, like how good your school is, how good the coach is. All those kind of things will make or break your recruiting commitments. Coach stability. If your coach is always leaving or the team's always finding their coaches, it may be harder to get recruits because they don't have a set coaching staff year in and year out. Another thing that's pretty big is athletic facilities. Let's say you decide to create NDSU. Their facilities are not as good as Alabama or Texas. And I mean, that's to be expected. It's a smaller school. So maybe there's ways in here that you can get your athletic facilities up by winning games and, competing at higher levels. Another thing is proximity to home. How close you are to home. Like a player from Wyoming will most likely like to choose Wyoming because they'll be close to their family, which is something that if they got recruited by Alabama, they would not be. Even in today's college football, recruiting strategies stand tall. For example, a lot of places have pipelines. Well, Florida is now broken into 3 different pipelines: North Florida, Central Florida, and South Florida. Similarly to the Metro Atlanta is its own pipeline, whereas New York and New Jersey are combined to become a single pipeline. There's 50 total pipelines in college football 25, and this is because, some places have those blue chip talents, but they're not common. So there's a blue chip talent coming out of a place every now and then, not every, single recruiting class, whereas Florida has probably 50 of them. And so if you split them up, you can get multiple different pipelines, which I think is a really cool, realistic way to look at it from the creators of the game. Every recruit will start with a list of schools they're interested in, just like in NCAA 14. And as you get, closer to the top of the list, so we're talking top 8, top 5, top 3, recruits will start locking people out, like I said before, based on some of the 14 strategies that I talked about before. The stages of recruiting will go, be discovery, where you figure out things about their prospect, like what position they are, their player type, what state they're in, what their minimum star rating is, their height, their weight. And handiness is only for quarterbacks, but it's a good thing to know about your quarterback. And if they're interested in your school, which is another big thing to know, because you want to go against players interested in your school, not ones who do not care about your school. There's 4 states of scouting. There is unscouted, which means you know nothing about them. Partially scouted, which means you know 25% about them. Mostly scouted, which is basically 50% of them, but the way they say it is you get 10% of a gold zone. So 10% of the gold zone basically means you unlock 10% of what, the abilities you actually care about. I bet the 25% is abilities you could care less about. Fully scouted means you know everything about them. Which is super, super cool to know. And hopefully they have coaching upgrades so that if you're a recruiting style coach, you'll be able to unlock those quicker so that you can figure out what players you want to get on your team. Once you determine what, prospects meet your initial criteria, you'll be able to get them to come to your school by recruiting them. And there's a bunch of steps of recruiting. There's 5 recruiting actions that you can do. You can offer a scholarship. You can search their social media, DM the player, contact friends and family, and send the house. Send the house is basically when you send all your coaches and all your staff to the player's house or a game or something to meet with them to get them to feel like a family. And that's a good way to get them to come to your school. They also have what's called pitch, which is where you will pitch your school to the prospect in a couple different ways. When you're pitching to the prospect, you can do a soft sell or a hard sell. The soft sell awards a moderate amount of influence when choosing the correct pitch. It also limits the downside risk and penalty of pitching the prospect on something they do not care about. Hard sell, this provides the most influence when choosing the correct pick, but it also comes with the largest penalty. That's something that they talked about in the 75,000 words that they posted, which thankfully I was able to read and be able to kind of break it down a little bit. Obviously, I can't go into depth on everything because I don't want this video to be an hour long. After selecting your pitch, you'll have 20 different pitch options that will go, in sequential order. So you know how you pick different ways you can talk to the press in Madden for for superstar and stuff like that. You'll be able to do the same thing in college football, but pitching to the player depending on what they like. So if they like academics and they like playing time, then you pitch them about the academics of the school and that they'll get a lot of playing time, not that your school is a party school. That's kind of the idea of that. Now the final step in recruiting is the close. This is when you'll bring your prospect in for an official visit, and you want to make sure that they have a scholarship when you're bringing them for the final visit, because if they don't, they're most likely not going to commit to your school that week because they don't have a scholarship, which means they don't care about coming to your school because you're not giving them money to come there. Over the last 3 years, the transfer portal has completely changed for the college, and EA Sports really wanted to hit on this. So there's a lot to unpack about the transfer portal. If you have a player, there's an 85 player limit on each team every season. Let's say you have a player who's a 72 overall, but in the transfer portal, you're getting an 80 overall in that same position. You can tell the 72 overall to go somewhere else so that they can still play and be a starter, whereas you'll have the 80 overall to help your team right now. This being said, they wanted to make sure that the transfer portal is unpredictable, and some teams will have mass exits because a coach left or other things, while others may have 0 exits and only a lot of players coming in. Every recruit will make their final decision on signing day. And something you may have missed is some recruits can verbally commit. This means they can decommit until signing day, which is the last day, where if they're, verbally committed on signing day, they're committing to your school no matter what. There's no commit to your school, decommit, that kind of thing. Any recruit that is not signed after signing day will be a walk-on for teams. So let's say you only have 25 scholarships, you give out 25 scholarships, and you had 30 players on your board and 5 of them are really interested in your school, they may walk onto your school, so you will still get those players, or they will go somewhere else and walk on there, which I think is really cool, because in NCAA 14 they did not have that, and so those guys just disappeared, even though a kicker isn't going to be heavily scouted like, you know, a linebacker would be, or a quarterback. The offseason is the most important time in college football, which EA Sports really did want to emphasize, because what they did was every offseason you have different ways a player can grow, and I think you can select them, which they kind of hinted at in the blog, but they didn't initially say. But they did talk about development traits, which are kind of like development traits in Madden, like X factors. These go from normal, which is just a normal progression rate, impact player, to someone who will get better as the years go on, a star player who is one of the best players on your team, and elite. So this is like an X factor in Madden. Each of those will get different progressions during the season and during the off season. So if you have an elite, you know, freshman, then you may have a generational talent right there, kind of like in Madden, and they may be a 99 overall coming into their, you know, junior year. Each position group will have different things that they work on during each offseason, and these are called skill groups. So a skill group for a running back is going to be trucking, strength, stiff arm, toughness, jumping, and injury, and every skill group has a max level of 10. So if all your running backs have a max level of 10, you may want to work on receiving if they're not getting that skill group already. Now, impact players are, you know, a big key to the game, and they're easily highlighted on the field. Each team will have impact players and, you know, star players. But if you have a star player on someone who's not a star player, it will feel like you have a star player on some guy who isn't a star. It's not like Madden, where you can have a 70 overall corner on Justin Jefferson, and Justin Jefferson still loses the battle against this corner. That doesn't make sense. They're making sure that doesn't happen in college football. Let's talk about wear and tear in Dynasty. This is something that I feel a lot of people were worried about the game, but maybe you shouldn't be, because the wear and tear is kind of like how some games do it, where like Madden does have a wear and tear system, kind of, because if you're practicing hard each week, they're going to get, you know, tired quicker in game, they're going to get injured and that kind of thing. Well, they're putting a more emphasis on that in college football, where if your player has slight injury to their right shoulder and a really bad ankle injury, well, their right shoulder is going to be completely fine come game day next week, but their ankle is still going to be mildly hurt or slightly hurt now. That doesn't mean they can't play. That just means that they may not be able to play to the highest of their abilities or really prove themselves overall wise, which I feel like is a super cool, realistic way to play the game. So it really makes you think about how you want to play. A lot has happened since we last had a college football game, like a 12-team playoff format, which is new to college football. And they will have that in the game, even though it's not here in real life quite yet. One of the most exciting parts is with the new 12-team format, you will be able to host on-campus games. The first 6 games of the playoff, you will be able to have it on campus, where everything else will start to be in those arenas. So like the Orange Bowl, the Sugar Bowl, the Rose Bowl, the Fiesta Bowl, Cotton Bowl, and Peach Bowl will all be in their, you know, signified stadiums. Whereas the first game of the 12-team playoff will be at your home stadium. Whoever has the better record gets home field advantage, obviously, and that will boost some of the scores so that you can get better recruits in the future, which is another thing that I feel would really help. Like if you have a player that is looking at Duke in North Carolina and they go to the Duke North Carolina rivalry game, well, that's something that's really cool that might turn the player to want to go to North Carolina if North Carolina wins and they're at the North Carolina Stadium and the hype is real. Every conference is set up with their 2024 alignments, so USC and Oregon are in the Big Ten. I'm pretty sure, I may be wrong on that. The Pac-12 is pretty much non-existent now thanks to everyone moving out. You can change these back to the original settings because they are allowing you to do custom, you know, configuration of conferences like they had in NCAA 14, and you can also choose custom schedules other than, you know, obviously games that you can't change, like rivalry games, which they pushed out to 2030, I'm pretty sure, for scheduling wise. And also, you cannot change your in-conference games so that you play no one in conference. You have to play people in conference. That's just how it works. Crowd themes are also for games. So like if you have a whiteout, blackout, you know, checkerboard or striping, those crowd themes will be in your first home game for rivalry games. And if it's a named game of the week, I don't know if you can pick what games have what themes, but it'd be super cool if they put that into the game. In addition to custom conferences, you can change your schedule, like I said, but they also brought in a preseason game. So week 0, some teams have week 0. I didn't feel like it was super necessary to put it on here, but I will touch on it a little bit. Some teams have week 0, some teams do not. So like Michigan and Appalachian State, you can make that happen again, but I don't think the game will count. Those games will start on Labor Day, I'm pretty sure, because that's typically when they start in real life. College football loves to celebrate accomplishments. That's why they have, you know, the water jug rivalries and stuff like that, because Michigan and Minnesota have the water jug that you know, get if you win that game. Well, Michigan State has the lumberjack. All those things are going to be in the game because those are really cool things that you get to play for. And also Conference Bowl and national titles trophies will be in the game. Obviously, no career mode would be complete without keeping track of players' stats. Career stat track will be for individual players through their entirety of college, will be in the game. Coach stats will be in the game. The record book that covers, you know, career season and game level stats will be in the game. So if a player breaks a, you know, record in game, they get to see that in game. And it's super cool because I think the teams will take a time out to celebrate it, or, you know, celebrate it off on the sidelines, and you kind of get to see that, which is just a new cool presentation thing that they would do. Some teams like Ohio State and Florida State, they have stickers that go on the helmet. Well, guess what? Those stickers are going to be on the helmets, and they're not just going to be randomly placed, because you actually get to be able to choose the stickers for the helmet. I don't know if that's something you would have to do in player customizing with the helmet, and you have to put stickers on the helmet, or as they just progress through the years, they will get stickers on their helmet. Let's talk a little bit about Dynasty, like online. So you can play up to 30 seasons on your online Dynasty, and up to 32 users can participate in Dynasty offline or online. Only one user per school, so kind of like Madden. The commissioner is in charge of determining the settings for Dynasty. That's not that big of a deal. It's basically just like Madden. Commissioner status can be transferred from members on screen as well. And commissioners have the ability to force wins in the event that a game was not able to be completed. And for those of you who like to restart game versus the CPU that isn't going your way, the number of times a game was start is tracked, and the scores schedule screens for all of those to see. Let's say you go against Michigan 6 times, you lose 5 times, but you win that 6th game. Everyone gets to see that you played them 6 times, and they can decide what they want to do about that. That's pretty much it. And like I said, if you want to win a copy of the game, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. And I hope I was able to touch on everything you wanted to see. And yeah, I hope you guys are ready for the rebuilds that come out for College Football 25.